Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little different. We aren't just, analyzing a concept or a news story. We are effectively transporting ourselves into a room that is just vibrating with history.
It really is.
We've got this stack of documents, transcripts of speeches, notes, even observations from video footage filmed by Raul Dudnicki, and it all centers on one huge event.
The 60th anniversary of the St. Clement of Ohrid Macedonian Orthodox Church in Toronto.
Exactly.
And it's a fascinating archive to dig through. You're so right about that vibration. Even just reading the transcripts, you get this palpable sense of weight.
Yeah.
You've got the solemnity of the high-ranking clergy, the smell of incense, the chanting. But then it mixes with this very raw human emotion.
It's not just a party.
No, not at all. It's a celebration, sure, but it feels more like a victory lap for a community that maybe wasn't supposed to make it this far.
That is the exact vibe I got. It's not just happy birthday to a building. It feels like a statement of survival. And looking at the descriptions of the scene, the packed hall, the dignitaries, it's clear this is a major, major milestone.
Exactly. And so our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how that happened. How does a single building in Toronto become what the speakers call a mother church, a Mecca?
Right.
We're going to trace this from the early migrant struggles at the turn of the 20th century right up to this massive 60th Jubilee.
And I have to say, the thing that hooked me wasn't necessarily the theology, it was the names.
Ah, yes.
The specific families, the villages, the unsung heroes. It makes this massive history feel like a family scrapbook.
It does.
But before we get to the people, let's set the stage. Why this specific church? Why is St. Clement of Ohrid such a big deal?
Well, to understand that, you have to understand the void that was there before it was built. If we look at the source material, the speakers talk about the early timeline of Macedonian migration to Canada.
We're talking way back.
Way back. Turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. These were the Petulbari, the migrant workers.
All right, coming over to work in, industry, railroads, bakeries, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And the sources highlight a very specific pain point for them. These were deeply religious people. Faith was a core part of their identity, but they were spiritually homeless.
Because there was no Macedonian church structure yet.
Correct. Due to the very complex political partitioning of Macedonia and the Balkans at that time, a distinct, independent Macedonian church it didn't exist, or at least wasn't recognized.
So what did they do?
So you have these immigrants in Canada who want to pray, they want to baptize their kids, but they have to go to Russian churches, Greek churches, maybe Bulgarian ones.
It's like being a guest at someone else's dinner table every single Sunday.
That's a perfect analogy.
You get fed, but you can't really relax. You can't speak your own language. You're always on your best behavior in someone else's house.
That's it. They were guests. And for a community that felt its identity was already under threat back home, being a guest in the diaspora was doubly painful. They didn't just want a place to pray. They needed a living room, a space that was undeniably theirs.
And that brings us to 1958. This date keeps popping up in the documents like a flare. Why is 1958 the turning point?
Well, 1958 just changed the entire geometry of the situation. That was the year of the proclamation of the independence of the Macedonian Orthodox Church, the restoration of the Ohrid Archbishopric back in the homeland.
So after centuries, they finally got their spiritual independence back.
Yes, and the source material describes the reaction in the diaspora as electric. The news traveled with great speed to Australia, the USA, Canada.
This is pre-internet.
Pre-internet, we're talking letters, telegrams, word of mouth, but it just sparked a fire.
It must have been incredible. The whole mindset shifts, right? From we are refugees making do to we are builders with a mandate.
Precisely. Suddenly, building a Macedonian church wasn't just a dream. It was possible. They had the ecclesiastical authority. Now they just needed the bricks and the money.
Which leads to this concept of Matica. The speakers at the anniversary keep calling St. Clement's the Matica. I know it translates to mother or matrix, but it feels heavier than that here.
It is. In this context, Matica implies like the source code, the headwaters. St. Clement's wasn't just a local parish for a Toronto neighborhood. It was the first Macedonian temple in Canada.
The first one.
The first one, consecrated 60 years ago. It's the seed from which the entire Canadian diocese eventually grew. If St. Clement's hadn't succeeded, the others They might not exist today.
So let's zoom in on that moment, the moment they decided to plant that seed. The records are so specific, which I love. August 7th, 1962.
A Tuesday, I think. And this wasn't casual chat. The documents say they were in the presence of Metropolitan Nasim. This was a formal, binding decision.
They were signing their names to a massive responsibility.
A huge responsibility.
Yeah.
And speaking of names, it's great that we have the roster of that first committee. It just grounds the history.
It really does. So, first president, Spiros Androst. And the text makes a point of noting he was a prominent immigrant from the village of Zilevo.
And that detail is crucial. Yeah. In diaspora studies, and specifically in Macedonian culture, the village identity is your primary trust network.
Right.
By saying he was from Zilevo, the speaker is signaling to the whole audience, we know who this man was, who his family was, what kind of work ethic he brought. It's shorthand for credibility. He's from Zilevo, he's solid.
It's like saying he's one of us in a very specific, granular way.
Exactly.
Then you have the vice presidents, Kosta Andrus and Pavel Vasilevsky, secretaries Peter Florov and Dan Pappas, treasurer Mike Neshevich.
And these aren't just names on a plaque. For the people sitting in that church at the 60th anniversary, these are grandfathers, uncles. These are the people who probably put up their own homes as collateral for the first loans.
Wow. There's a beautiful metaphor used in one of the speeches, comparing the church to a house built on stone rather than sand.
Building a house on stone. It's biblical reference, of course, Matthew 7, but here is also very literal and cultural. They were building an institution designed to withstand the pressures of assimilation.
Sand shifts.
Sand shifts, it washes away. Stone stays. They're basically saying, we are planting a flag here in Canada and we are not moving, we are not dissolving.
But a building is just a shell if nobody uses it. And the transcript makes it so clear that St. Clement's wasn't just a place for an hour on Sunday. It sounds like it was operating 24/7. It was a whole ecosystem.
That's the key. Yeah. That is how these mother churches work. They become a cultural ecosystem. I mean, if you just look at the list of groups operating within the church, it's staggering. You have the Sunday school, which is standard, but then Paga, the folklore ensemble. This is huge. For a kid growing up in, say, 1970s Toronto, Macedonian wasn't just a dance class. It's where you learn the rhythm of your culture. Literally, the dances, the songs, the costumes. It's embodied memory.
Keeping the culture alive in the body, not just the mind. And for the older generation, the source mentions the Gocha Delchev Pensioners Club.
A place to speak the language without apology. A hedge against isolation. I mean, if you don't speak English perfectly, Toronto can be a lonely place. The church gave them a social hub.
And then the Miladinov Brothers Literary Society.
Which I found fascinating. It shows they weren't just concerned with survival or folk dancing. They cared about high culture, literature, history, intellectual debate. They were maintaining the intellectual life of the nation in exile.
And we can't skip the women's section. The speeches are very emphatic about their continuous support.
The Zinsky Sikshija. Often the financial backbone of these places, the fundraising, the organizing, the logistical glue that holds the stone together. Without them, the lights probably don't stay on.
There's a bold claim in the transcript I wanted to ask you about. One speaker says the Toronto area is likely the place with the second highest number of Macedonians in the world after Skopje.
It sounds like hyperbole, but demographically, it's a very, very heavy concentration. Toronto became a magnet. We call it chain migration.
Oh, right.
Once St. Clement's was built, it signaled to everyone back home, come here. We have a structure. We have a church. We have a community. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you were leaving Macedonia, you went where the church was.
Safety in numbers. And that solidarity, it wasn't just local. The guest list for the 60th anniversary was impressive.
It really was.
They had delegations from St. Nicholas in Windsor, the Nativity of the Virgin Mary from Detroit, St. Cyril and Methodius from New Jersey.
And that tells you about the network. These are isolated islands. Detroit, Windsor, New Jersey, they are all interconnected. The fact that they traveled for this milestone reinforces St. Clement's status. You traveled to pay respects to the map.
So let's talk about the ceremony itself. The 60th anniversary, it sounds like they pulled out all the stops. The guest of honor was Archbishop Stefan himself.
The Archbishop of Ohrid in Macedonia. His presence is the ultimate seal of approval. He is the successor to St. Clement of Ohrid. By having him there physically in Toronto, they are drawing a direct, unbroken line from a medieval saint in the Balkans to a congregation in Canada in the 21st century.
It just collapses the distance.
It collapses everything. Time, space, the homeland and the diaspora become one for that moment.
He gave a speech, I think, connecting the church to the tree planted by St. Clement of Ohrid centuries ago is such a powerful image of roots and Ohrid branches in Toronto.
It reframes the whole immigrant experience. It's not a departure or a loss, it's an expansion. The tree just got bigger, the roots are still deep.
The transcript also captures parts of the liturgy, the prayers, and it sets such a specific tone. They're praying for peace in the world, for the well-being of the churches.
And for Christ-loving people to be protected from enemies. It grounds the event. Amidst the celebration and the history, they stop to do the actual work at the church.
Right.
Prayer. It reminds everyone that the core function is spiritual. It's not just a community center, it's a sanctuary.
Now, there was a moment in the ceremony that I found really moving, the roll call. The speaker took the time to list the priests who have served the church over the decades, and it was a long list.
A very long list, and that was intentional. Listing those names is an act of oral history. When you read names like Kirill Stojanovsky, Atanas Popov, Mikhail Teoharev, you're not just listing employees.
No.
You're listing the men who baptized the people in the audience.
Let's read a few more because the speaker emphasized they dedicated their lives to this place.
Ivan
Branko Pachevsky, Dragi Kostanovsky, Elijah Dmitrievsky,
Kulchimyovsky, Yovan Vosiovsky, Elijah Danev,
Trashko Bosiovsky, Konstantin Metrovsky, Blogoja Dmitrievsky, and then, of course, the current priests, Sasha Shulesky and Alexander Todorovsky.
And just think about the life cycle events tied to those names. Weddings, funerals, confessions. The speaker is acknowledging that the history of the community is written in the service of these men.
But then he did something very classy. He pivoted. He said, these men were out front, but who was behind them? And he dedicated a whole segment to the papadi.
Yes, the papadi, the plural for papadija, the priest's wife. In the Orthodox tradition, this isn't just a spouse. It's a role. A vocation in itself.
The speaker was so humble here. He asked for forgiveness if he forgot anyone, but he named several. Katerina, Ivana, Maja, Dejana, Marija, Daniela, Christina, Mila.
And he credits them as the greatest support to the pastors. It's a recognition of the invisible labor, the emotional labor. I mean, being the wife of a priest in a tight-knit immigrant community is a 247 job.
You're under a microscope.
A total microscope. You're the emotional buffer. Acknowledging them publicly like that, it balances the scales a bit. A very human moment.
And the gratitude just kept expanding. They thanked the board of directors from 1965 to 2025. That is 60 years of board meetings.
Can you even imagine? 60 years of arguing about budgets, fixing the roof, planning festivals.
Thankless work most of the time. And the kitchen staff.
The engine room. You cannot have a Macedonian church event without food. That feast didn't happen by magic. It happened because people showed up at 5 in the morning to start cooking.
It just drives home the point that the stone foundation isn't actually stone. It's people. It's sweat equity.
And that's the big takeaway. These institutions, they look so solid, so permanent, but they're fluid. They're made of thousands of hours of volunteer time, of people just choosing to show up.
So when we step back and look at this whole 60-year arc, what does it all mean? The source material quotes this sentiment: Macedonia is free, lives freely.
That's the core tension and the resolution. For a long time, the homeland wasn't free or its church wasn't recognized, so the diaspora took on the burden of carrying that torch.
So they created a space where the idea of Macedonia, the identity, could live freely, even if they weren't physically there.
They carved out a piece of territory in Ontario and said, "This is ours." And from an expert view, this whole story just illustrates the quintessential immigrant experience. You arrive, often alone, you organize, you build for identity, and then, if you succeed, you build a legacy that outlasts you.
It's amazing to think about that first committee in 1962, Spiro Sandrost and the others. Do you think they could have imagined this? A 60th anniversary with the Archbishop, guests from all over North America?
They probably hoped for it. But to see it realized, to hear the choir, to see the Macedonian dancers, the church, that is the vindication of their effort. They built on stone. They won the bet against assimilation.
It really makes you think about the value of physical places. We live in such a digital world now. Our communities are online, Facebook groups, Zoom calls.
And that raises a really important, provocative question for us today.
It does, right?
In a digital world, can an online group ever replace the feeling of standing in a specific building? Can a Facebook group replace the smell of incense, the sight of icons, and the knowledge that your grandfather stood in that exact spot 40 years ago?
I don't think it can. I really don't. St. Clement's proves that bricks and mortar, when they're filled with history and spirit, have an irreplaceable value.
It's the difference between a network and a home. St. Clement's is a home. You can't live in the cloud.
Well said. A home that has stood for 60 years and looks ready for 60 more. We'll leave you with that thought to mull over. What are the stone foundations in your own life? Where is your matica?
Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
See you next time.